touch on their game. Did you want to just knock it out, Phoenix?
You could go ahead.
Starfield?
Yeah, go. Do it.
Okay. Hold on. I don't think I can be a Oscar Mayer bat with all this going on. So let me hot dog myself.
No, you made me lose all hope in humanity.
I can't do it. Chaz took so long to set everything up. I've been melting away. I've been making my own relish in this darn thing. So
Delicious.
Melting.
Your own cheese? Your own gooch cheese?
Oh man. So
as long as there's no
Starfield.
mayo.
So
there's no mayo.
Please.
No what?
As long as there's no mayo, we're all good.
No mayo? Who puts mayo on a hot dog?
You'd be surprised.
You'd be surprised. I'm
Just
sure
saying.
somebody does.
People put mayo on their French fries.
See, that's not so bad. Actually, I like mixing the mayo and the ketchup. You kind of make that, nice creamy pinky mix.
Speaking of which, this is the friendliest podcast in the internet when it comes to mayo on your hot dog. So if you do that, we welcome you with arms wide open.
We don't discriminate against your condiments.
In the words of Scott,
we take all shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
Anywho, so I think last time we had talked about Starfield, I had just played I think the first 12, 13 hours or so. Chaz, had you started it at that point?
I don't think so. I started it a couple days after you.
Okay. What was your kind of feelings on it before I go through and kind of throw up on this game? What do you kind of take away from it?
Well, I feel like that's why I don't want to go on too long about it, at least on my end, because last podcast, I feel like every gripe I had, I literally put in that. But I guess just to kind of gather up my thoughts and to reiterate, I feel like I phrase it as the game does I don't want to say good job, but it does the classic Bethesda kind of chore list pretty good. It does a good job of throwing a bunch of stuff at you, and it has some of the discoverability type things on planets and things. As I kind of I feel like I've said it before, but there's not much that's at least for me, that's that interesting. I feel like in our free time off podcast, we talked that I don't necessarily think the what's the name of it? The what's the artificial? What is it? The
procedural
generation.
Content?
I feel like we've talked about it, but I feel like that kind of hinders a lot of the explorability. There's not much that you see out in the world that is super interesting. I've said it many times, but I've gone to different planets and seen the exact same structures. I've seen the exact same cave formations. There's not a heck of a whole lot of enemy types, so you're going to see a lot of the same people no matter where you go. And I don't know, maybe
this game's boring.
It's very boring.
I think this is the bottom line.
Even in the powers though, I didn't feel in the upgrades, every time I would use my skill points for something new, I didn't really feel I feel like the only thing I saw was upgrading or making my backpack larger. It's oh, okay, I can carry more items, which I didn't that's actually something I didn't mention. The whole over encumberment thing here is so annoying because
it hits harder in this game than it does in other games. I mean, every Bethesda game has over encumberment, so you have to deal with weight management and all that. This game though, it hits you really hard, really fast, and I think I was reading they lowered the weight amount because they wanted to feel, once again, quote unquote, more realistic. And I think that's what kind of neutered this game across the board. I mean, a lot of things kind of did, but I think this focus on trying to make things pseudo-grounded, pseudo-believable in this, space, sci-fi, epic fantasy, whatever it is, I think just really kind of nerfed some of the extravagant kind of enjoyment you get out of these games. If I think about every other Bethesda game, there's something over the top about it. And honestly, that's one of the elements that always kind of drags me or brings me through the game. Like Skyrim, it's this very just, medieval fantasy, kind of Lord of the Ringsy thing. That over the topness with all the crazy, magic stuff going on. Just there's so much going on that is just crazy, kind of pulls you through the game, right? Fallout, very quirky, kind of dark humor, that pulls you through. This game doesn't have that. It's very grounded in such a way that nothing is interesting, all the way down to like a lot of the quest lines. The companions are very dull. Like none of them are overly unique or extravagant. Like, so think about Fallout, the companions you have in that game, even in Fallout 4, which I know is not everybody's favorite. You had a freaking detective synth robot dude following you around. Like, you had this crazy dark lore backstory.
You had a mutant following you around.
Yeah, you'd have mutants follow. Like, you had just these really off-the-cuff, weird things that could happen and interact with. And in this game, you just don't get that. So I think just that grounded element did not work in their favor here. I mean, I get how some people would enjoy kind of the NASA-inspired aesthetic, and some people do appreciate that grounded approach. This game, I think because it didn't have anything else to add. I think that's the problem, is like, this would have been fine if there was something else. And I think I have that issue with every system I encounter in the game. Like, every system on its own is fine, but there's no wow factor in the game. Like, you know, a lot of people will say that some games are greater than the sum of their parts. Like, the individual parts are kind of whatever. When it all comes together, it makes this amazing thing. This game is very much just its parts. And its parts, when they add together, almost feel lesser. It is not greater than anything being put together. It feels like all the parts are kind of disjointed in a lot of ways. And I think the biggest thing for me, and I think, Chaz, you had mentioned this game, out of all Bethesda games, is lacking, for me, the most crucial element, and that's the exploration factor. Like, for a game that especially they really sold as this great big space exploration epic, exploration is the worst part of this entire game. I know you had mentioned it. Seriously.
It is.
And I know, Chaz, I'm pretty sure you said this last time, like in Fallout, you get out of the vault and then you just go in a direction, right? It doesn't matter if you're going towards a main quest or just some empty spot on the map. You will find fun stuff, interesting stuff, quirky stuff. You'll find something. You can't do that at all in this game. There is no going off and exploring. Like, every place you go to, you're just teleporting to main hub to main hub to main hub. And when you're at one of the cities, you don't really leave the city and go off. Like in other Bethesda games, the city was this hub to find a quest, and it pushed you back out into the world. This just kind of traps you in the city, and then it says, okay, go out into space, but space is not this continuous explorative area. You just like go from the ground, teleport to your ship, you teleport to space, you teleport to a planet. There is no real travel in this game beyond just fast travel.
And I...
go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, I think, again, that's why the procedural generation, it ruins a lot of the fun of the, as you were saying, the discoverability, like, or explore. Like, in Skyrim, like, when you were seeing Winterhold in the distance, you know, and you're like, oh, what is that? Or when you saw the college, was the Winterhold College? I don't remember.
Yeah, the wizard, basically Harry Potter
like when
school.
you saw the school, or when you saw, like, specific mountains when you got there. I don't know. I feel like maybe the procedural generation just kind of, it ruins the interest factor of what you're going to find. Like, maybe a smaller...
It's the bulk.
Perhaps
it's the
a smaller
bulk of what their
universe would have been more
exploration is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, here's the thing about procedural content. The only time it works is when the focus of the procedural generated whatever, it's not about the content, it's about the gameplay. Like, if I think about every other game that's had procedural generated anything, I don't play it for the procedural generated content. I play it because what I'm doing in that content is fun. So, like, I know these are different styles of games, but like Hades has procedural generated rooms, right? Or they're randomized to a certain extent, maybe not true procedural, but there are a lot of games that, you know, they procedurally lay out these new quote-unquote environments for you to explore. Yeah, Returnal is actually a good one, right? Once again, it's not truly procedural. They're just rooms that are kind of rearranged and whatnot, but it's not about where you're at. It's not about the procedural content. It's about the gameplay that you're interacting with in that content.
Yeah.
Exactly. And with Starfield, the moment-to-moment gameplay is dull, especially from an exploration standpoint. Like, all you do is you mine some things, you scan some things, and the areas you're going to go dig around in on these procedural areas are as bland as can be, or pointless, or there's nothing to do. I think that's the other thing, is like, every time I thought I found something interesting and I went through the effort of going through a cave or picking a lock or doing whatever, I almost never got rewarded for it. Like, a lot of the caves in these procedural areas were either empty, or maybe had a couple of like weird alien creatures in it that didn't drop any loot. There was no story elements. It was literally just a cave, and then maybe some little box at the end with some crappy gun. Not a gun that was like a reward for completing a cave. It's just like, here is a procedural box with some procedural, procedurally generated nonsense in it. And then you'd even have times where like you'd go through the effort of like going through a quote unquote dungeon, you find the master lock safe at the end, like, okay, this is where the loot's going to be. I had a couple of times where I opened up the master lock safe, there was nothing in it.
Mm-hmm.
It was empty.
Sounds
or there was like
Diablo
a
4 to
low-level
me.
basic gun. And I'm sure it's because everything is randomized, procedural, which is supposed to make things more playable, but it really just sucked all my enjoyment out of being rewarded for trying to explore.
As you were saying, the realism aspect is what ruins, a lot of the loot aspect, because it's like, why am I gonna care about going and finding new guns and finding chests when it's gonna be something realistic in there? Like the guns
most
are not
of the loot
like
is super bland.
Yeah.
Like, I know you were talking about how combat is better in this game. Here's the thing, it's mid at best. Like, what made combat fun in like Fallout 3 or Fallout 4 was not the act of shooting something, it was like what you were shooting. I was shooting a rocket launcher. Well, even the weapons, like I was shooting a mini nuke, or I was shooting something that could shoot out teddy bears. Like, you had just weird, crazy weapons and arsenal that you could pull from. This game is like, here's a rifle. Oh, now this rifle you can add, new stock to or sight on it. It basically grounded it down, so the combat was mostly just a standard FPS kind of thing. But when you put it into that comparative category, it doesn't hold up. Like, the basic gameplay is fine, but this is no Call of Duty. This isn't even like a Borderlands. Like, if you're trying to then take away the extravagance of it and just kind of get down to nuts and bolts of this is a FPS, it's not a good one. It's fine at best. I think that's my biggest issue with this game is if you take away the one thing I loved about Bethesda games, the exploration, all you're left with are all the Bethesda systems. And to be fair, they're the same systems for the most part you've had in all the other Bethesda games, but they're not great on their own. Like, you think about Bethesda's inventory management has never been good, right? Which once again corresponds to the looting. You think about the dialogue choices. In this game, the dialogue's fine. I mean, I guess I somewhat enjoyed the persuade options. Like, it was a little more involved than maybe in past games.
Something I mentioned in the previous talk is I brought up the very grounded, real aspect of the universe and the world. It, again, not only does it affect the loot as we were talking about, but it affects, like, I feel like the NPC interactions are I mentioned this, the NPC interactions are very basic. It's like, how interesting can a conversation be when, like, every conversation you have with a random NPC is something like, it's pretty basic. It's like, oh, what do you do here? What's your job? What do you like to do for fun? Where should I go? What are the notable places I should go here? And it's like every conversation is similar to that. And it's like,
yeah,
I don't know.
It's all, it's all quote unquote realistic. Or, I mean, I know I keep saying the same thing about this game, and this is not new. None of these perspectives are new. I mean, looking across, any review channel, I think you've heard most of these similar opinions at this point, but I really wanted to like this game more. And there was a point I thought I was going to, like towards the end of the game, there are some things that pick up a little bit. But when I beat the game and came back, and to be fair, I beat the game technically twice. I did the first run through, I did a whole run through of New Game Plus, and when you realize how the game kind of plays out, there's nothing really intriguing to bring you back to it. Like, there are some cool things to do to enhance your character, but you have to think about, okay, why are you bothering? Like, once again, at the end of the day, you're just interacting with these Bethesda systems, which on their own are not that fun. They feel very outdated and archaic now, which was hidden when the exploration was good, right? Like, Fallout 4 even felt old when it came out, but I liked that I could go and explore Boston and some of the weird stuff that could happen out in the world. When you take that away from the game, you're left with outdated systems, janky graphics sometimes, in this case, very boring characters, which I think is the biggest just miss by them, because they've typically done really well creating these interesting characters and storylines and whatnot. And a lot of people are even praising a lot of the faction quests. I don't think they're great. I think they're fine. Like, comparative to other Bethesda games, none of the factions are nearly as good. Like, I think about the Thieves Guild quest from Oblivion, which was awesome.
Oh, the Dark Brotherhood.
Or the Dark Brotherhood from Skyrim. Or even a lot of the stuff in Fallout, like a lot of the Brotherhood quests. Like, those factions had some really cool stuff going on in them. The best faction quest in Starfield, the Crimson Fleet stuff, is fine. it's not great. I could pick that apart still as stuff I didn't really like about it. With the way the characters interact with you and some of your choices you can make aren't really all that substantial. Like, there's really no choice in this game. It also drove me crazy too because like the factions don't acknowledge each other. Like the way this game is set up, without going too much detail,
I'm bored.
most of these factions, huh?
I'm bored.
You're bored. I'll tell you, it doesn't take long to get bored with this game.
We'll get bored talking about it.
I know, but give me a few more minutes to rant because there's a couple of points that drive me crazy.
I'm being facetious.
I'm not joking. It's boring, but my point being, like, this game sets you up. I understand this game actually has some interesting like background and lore to it. I just realized I'm talking in a hot dog costume. It takes any kind of punch away from what I'm saying. But there's been work done to expand this story, but the way it plays out in this game is very disappointing. Because you have these factions set up. You have like, oh man, what were they? You have the United Colonies, and then you have like the I can't remember the Cowboy Freestar something. I don't know. You have all these factions that have history where they conflict naturally, like they already are mad at each other about different things. And in the game, you can join all of them. There is no recognition. Like if I join the UC United Colony and I go start to the Freestar Collective, they don't acknowledge it at all, even though they basically hate the other group. Like if you went back to like New Vegas, they would know immediately that you were part of another faction or another section, and you get a lot of crap for you to have unique dialogue. And maybe there's some of that in the game, but it is so subtle if there is, and definitely doesn't have any impact on the overall gameplay. Like you can join every faction pretty much, barring one or two, and they all treat you exactly the same, which makes everything feel so disconnected. Like that's the other thing. The game already feels disconnected because the way you move around is just fast travel. Space, if anything, makes this game feel smaller because it doesn't feel like this expansive gap you're traveling to get from place to place, because the only way you get somewhere is going to your menu and saying, I want to go from this place to this place, and it's just fast travel, fast travel, fast travel. It makes completing missions so annoying because you literally will teleport to one planet, talk to some guy to check off part of your quest box,
have to go to another
and then you
planet.
Come back into your menu, fast travel to another planet to talk to some other guy to check off his box, immediately fast travel back to the other place, and it's just back and forth, super tedious, super boring. Man, I'm trying to think of where else to even go through with this game to like find bright spots. Like even at the end of the game, like the big twist. I mean, did you see the twist? Do you know how this game ends?
Oh, I didn't. I got like 20 hours in, and I was just like, I'm done.
Would you like me to tell you, or would you like to leave that?
I'm not going back to it. You can go ahead.
All right, so the way this game ends, there are no aliens, which still disappointed me.
There's no sentient or smart aliens.
Yeah, there's no sentient aliens. You got plenty of alien creatures, which they could all be the exact same model, exact same creature. Like, there's no difference in behavior.
Now, remember what I mentioned before would be an interesting DLC or expansion down the line would be like a First Contact. I don't know if they ever lead up to that, but
I don't think it would matter much in this game. So, like, the way the game ends...
it just becomes Mass Effect.
This doesn't hold a candle to Mass Effect.
No.
Like...
Oh, boy.
Anyway, the way it ends is it goes the multiverse route, where basically the whole game you've been collecting these artifacts. You find out basically it's a way to portal into another multiverse. So then your character gets reborn into this new world, and you start the whole story over, but with your character, like choices and whatnot, and you can basically...
Is it a more interesting multiverse? It puts
you in a different game? In the most superficial way. So, and this is where I think the interesting stuff started, but they didn't carry through with it far enough. Like, so, you know how the game starts, you end up meeting up Constellation? Mm-hmm. Like, that's the big kind of like group, the main faction, quote unquote, that kind of leads you through everything.
Yeah.
So when you go into a new multiverse, you have these random possibilities of when you go to meet Constellation for the first time, and spoiler alert for anybody who ever watches this, Constellation changes depending how you go to it. Like there's one where like the entire group of Constellation is made up by a bunch of your character, just all different versions of them. There's another one where they're replaced with plants. There's one where one of the characters went crazy and murdered everybody. Like there's some interesting things that finally happen, but it only applies to that, to my understanding, just to that Constellation group. The rest of the game is all still the same. So even though that's interesting, it doesn't permeate enough to make the game more interesting. It's like, oh, that was cute, that was funny, but But then you go and you still do the exact same stuff you did before, right? You still have to explore the same boring procedural content. You still collect the same artifacts that you did before. Like, the game doesn't get better. So, I don't know. I feel so odd that I am so disappointed with this game, because I went into this game with literally like no expectations at all. Like, I didn't get hyped up about it. I was like, it'll probably be fun. At best, it'll be Skyrim in space.
I had the smallest amount of hype. I was like, I was wary though of the entire time.
I think it was like I set my bar pretty low. Like, I literally would have been happy with just straight up Skyrim in space. I wouldn't have cared about the old systems. I wouldn't have cared about janky graphics. If I could have got just a similar Bethesda explorative game with a lot of those kind of cornerstones that have existed in all their other games, I would have been happy. But they ripped out the one thing I really liked. And I guess that almost makes you look back at other Bethesda games more negatively, because that's really the only thing I truly love about these Bethesda games is the weird, wacky world that you can explore with lots of just interesting content to kind of go between, which to me is a substantial thing. But if you rip that out, all these games are mediocre combat, mediocre or clunky systems, a lot of times clunky graphics. I don't know. It's very much soured my impressions or my taste on even past Bethesda games now, which is kind of sad.
I think it makes
and this game is still buggy.
I think it makes me look at the older ones more favorably, because
yes and no,
because it has. Granted, I mean, I get what you're saying. I'm just mean though that like the fact that they're able to spray Febreze, on those other elements, that like it's impressive. I mean, it's like, well, you're at least able to have some sort of
true. I guess maybe a better way to phrase this doesn't make me look poorly on those games. It makes me devalue a little bit of Bethesda's magic, if you will, right? Because those games were good because of that one element. But as soon as you yank out that one element and you think about what you're left with, it's not that appealing. Like the age in the engine and the kind of cracks that or I think we're showing a lot more in this, are so more apparent. And you're like, man, they plan on using this game for Elder Scrolls 6. Or this engine, I should say.
Ew.
I don't know. Disappointing. And the game's still buggy. I know a lot of people didn't have nearly as many issues, but I had some weird bugs too. I had one that almost soft locked me out of the whole game. There was this conversation that apparently a character was having with another just NPC. And then in my menu said, I want this character to hop on my ship because I just freed up space to have an extra person on it. Apparently it happened mid-conversation with these two NPCs, and it put this one character on my ship, and then halfway through, I could hear her talking to somebody, but there's nobody there. Mm-hmm. And apparently she was still having the conversation with the other person back on the old planet, which may not seem like a big deal, until she decided to bring me into the conversation. She turned to me and was like, let's ask this person's opinion. And then it locked me out because the other person wasn't on the ship. And there was nothing I could do. I had to keep backtracking to try to break the conversation or break out of it. The only way I was able to get the game to work, I had to literally trick her to follow me out of the ship and lead her back to the original person on the other planet so they could finish their conversation, and then I could be brought into it to say one line and continue the game. It took me like 3 hours to get through that nonsense.
I don't think I played long enough to
there's still weird, janky stuff.
See anything crazy like that.
Well, it's still there. I mean, maybe you avoid it. Maybe I heard some people say that possibly they just put more effort in the first like 10, 20 hours of the game so that it appeared more polished initially, and then the longer you play, the more cracks start to show. I don't know how true that is, because some of the stuff that pops up is like specific to like the system, so I feel like you would have noticed those earlier on. But I don't know. This game, I wanted to like, and I feel like there's a world where after a bunch of mods, like if you're playing this on a PC and you got good mod support, I've already seen people like start replacing characters like Star Wars characters and stuff and adding Star Wars planets. That might add enough enjoyment to keep this game going. Maybe the DLC will make it interesting. Bethesda has historically put out good DLC, but this base game is very mid. Like, I know nobody wants to call this a bad game. I mean,
it's not a great game.
It's not a good game.
I hate to.
People can still have fun in it though. Like if you enjoy certain systems, like you really get into the shipbuilding, or you really get into the outpost building, there are people who will find enjoyment in those systems. But if you're looking for a standard Bethesda open world, big explorative kind of context, you're just not going to get that here.
Most review places I saw gave it like a 7. And
what do you give it?
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that like I think that's along the lines of what I would say, but for me, I would drop it down one more point. I think to me it was like a middling experience. Like I didn't love. I mean, obviously I didn't finish it, but yeah, for me, like maybe 5, 6, probably maybe 6 if I'm being nice. You know.
Yeah, like I mean, I'm not usually big on like just giving things numbers because I mean they're very subjective. But I, if this, I wouldn't recommend this to somebody. Like even
Ouch.
somebody who likes Bethesda games, I'd say go play one of the old Bethesda games.
Oh yeah.
Like I don't think there's enough here to warrant a different experience that you wouldn't get from the other games. Like the space aspect of it is not worth it. Maybe the spaceship building, that's cool for a while. I know some people have spent a lot of time with that. I got over it pretty quick. I don't know. I mean, it's your mileage is going to vary. I just didn't retroactively thinking about what I did in the game, didn't enjoy any of it enough.
This
There was
is
no faction quest, there was no system. I felt like the game was so slow to like progress through, like level up. Like it took forever to get XP. And that made it very hard to enjoy building a character. I always felt underpowered. And I played this game for like 70, 80 hours, and I didn't feel like my character really got that fun to play. Like a lot of the skills were still locked out because the way they have the skill tree, it locks you out of doing stuff like at a very low level. Like I think the goal is they probably wanted you to really say, I want to be a stealth character and only invest in stealth. But if you want to spread out at all and you like want to be a decent pilot and have decent gunplay, you have to spread out, and it makes you kind of crappy at everything. Um, I think they're really expecting you to go through and do New Game Plus like 2, 3, 10 times, and then you build out a powerful character. Technically, the way the game is structured, you're supposed to get a max character. You have to play New Game Plus 16 times or something like that.
That's ridiculous.
And to be fair, it's not as long as you think. Like once you realize how the game kind of structures evolving your character, each new playthrough might only be like 3, 4 hours, something like that. But you'd have to go through the end credits and New Game Plus loop 16 times or some nonsense like that. And it is not worth it. This game's just not worth it. I'm sorry, y'all.
It's not the system seller that I think Microsoft was hoping it would be. I mean, I know because they were looking at this as being like, you know, I mean, they haven't had like a real home run since the last Forza. Maybe I know the last, but that's not a.
I'm curious what their metric for success is going to be here, because the game has not been, overly negative critically. Like, I mean, it's been a little muted, like it wasn't 10s across the board, but I think it ended up being a like high 7, 8 area, which is not terrible.
But they were looking at this to be like, it's a system seller. Like this was,
and it still kind of was. I mean, maybe not to the extent, but a lot of people did before. I think they knew what this game was. People went out and bought Xboxes for this game. And there are people who are enjoying it. Like, I know I'm coming across real negative and I wouldn't recommend it, but that's still not saying that people aren't going to find enjoyment in it. I've seen plenty of people online who are loving playing the game. I think it very much depends on how you play this game, though. Like, I think if you're a streamer and you have a chat with you, that's going to make it a lot more fun because you can engage in the game a little bit differently. I don't think playing a good guy in this game is worth it at all. Like if you're someone who likes to play Bethesda games as the morally good person, which is what the game wants you to be, like the narrative and your companions, all your companions are goody two-shoes. Even the bad ones are goody two-shoe. So they all want you to play a good character. That is the most boring way and ultimately unsatisfying way to play the game. I should have been a pirate at the very beginning, killed everybody, stole everything. That probably would have made my time a lot more enjoyable. But even then, I don't think the game wants you to do that. And I don't think you still long-term get a whole lot more out of it. But it's a game you'll find your own enjoyment out of if you really like the systems. I didn't. I did not enjoy this enough.
You're not convincing here, buddy. Hey, there's Final Fantasy 16, by the way. You can play that. It's super fun and enjoyable.
Maybe.
And
Maybe.
You don't have to think a lot.
No, you don't.
Instead of that game, it sounds like you have to think a lot and how much you hate yourself.
That's what you don't have. Well, you don't have to think a lot. Like you have to, there's no critical thing. Okay, I'm gonna rant again because that was the other thing about. Well, one of the other big elements of like Bethesda games, and granted they weren't always great with this, but they had some choice, right? You had to think about what was the impact of what I was gonna do, right?
Yeah, there was always some sort of karma system.
Yeah, and to be fair, a lot of times it was too black or white. People don't love that, but I would have taken even that. Just a super extreme, I do this evil thing, something evil happens. There's none of that in this game, really. At least not to any meaningful thing. Like, it's not like I make a decision and this whole faction's gone now, or like this whole planet blows up. Like, if I could have blown up a planet, man, if they could have taken what Megaton did, planet scale, like I could have driven around a Death Star. Like,
I was just gonna say, if you could get a Death Star or something crazy.
You could be
like this game needed the craziness. I mean, something. It either needed to be crazy on the gameplay or crazy on the story. Everything's just so flat across the board. I said some people are going to find some fun in here if they want something very grounded and they really like systems. They really like the Bethesda interactive kind of systems and management. It's not for me, though.
All right, so
I'll stop.
I don't want to keep us going. I just have one more point. So what does this mean exactly? Not Starfield. What does this mean for Bethesda as a whole? Because in my opinion, this is maybe not steep, but definitely is a decline in terms of fun or quality, in my opinion, for games. I mean, Fallout 4 was good, but it was not, it did not live up to New Vegas or Skyrim or Oblivion or Fallout 3. So for me, Fallout 4 was a bit of a dip. And then Fallout 76, another big dip, and now you have Starfield, which I don't know if you could call it a dip, but it most definitely is not a sharp incline. So it's like, what is the future hold for? I mean, obviously Elder Scrolls 6.
For Elder Scrolls 6,
it's like, oof.
Like how good is it gonna be? Like, it almost feels that it's all the future games are gonna just not. They're just gonna lack so much of that.
I'm actually gonna rate if they don't get Elder Scrolls 6 good. That's the one franchise where I'm like, I would rage.
So I think it really depends. Like, the good thing I think that goes in Elder Scrolls' favor that Starfield didn't have. Starfield, once again, brand new IP. They chose to go this realistic direction, and that's just how they kind of frame this world. Luckily, Elder Scrolls is already pretty established, right? It's already got this lore, it's already got this fantasy element. So, assuming they don't rewrite literal history in their game, it should come with more interesting stuff, I would hope. The only thing that would worry me at this point, which once again, I don't think Elder Scrolls is set up in the same way, the big thing that I think hurt Starfield was the lack of exploration. The fact that they yanked it out and everything was procedural and there was no connective tissue. It was you bouncing from planet to ship to planet to ship. You couldn't navigate just freely by walking to somewhere. As long as that comes back, you have a nice big open map in Elder Scrolls and I can move from one place to another. If it's procedural, that's going to hurt it. Like if every cave I go through is a procedural cave, that's not going to do it for me.
I hope they just use the same engine, I'll be honest, because every other game used pretty much relatively same engines. I think this one they changed it, didn't they? They had to do a lot of changes
creation, and they've upgraded the engine. They always upgrade the engine, but still the creation engine.
It's still creation.
I don't want them to stay with the same engine.
I want them to make it just better and just because they, even with its flaws, the older games, at least for the bare minimum, they were just fun. Like, no matter how you slice it, with their bugs, with their crap that those games came across, with missing textures and stupid nonsense like that, like you're willing to like kind of pass all that and laugh about it and just go to like the next awesome thing that they show.
And that's fair, but here's the thing. Like, so that's fair. And I think with this engine, they could make another Skyrim. Elder Scrolls 6 could just be Skyrim again, but a little bit better. And I think I'll be happier with that, because I'll hopefully bring back, the explorative nature and the quirkiness and all that kind of stuff that I was complaining about. But I think they're going to have another issue. If it is literally just the same, it's Skyrim again, especially if you're thinking, okay, this is going to be 6 years out probably. We're not seeing this game for a while. Games have evolved so much. Seriously, it will have been probably 15 years between the last Elder Scrolls to this one. I don't think they're going to be able to hold up from public perception with this engine anymore. They were limited in this engine. Like, a lot of people were complaining that, you couldn't, get in a Land Rover and drive around on Mars or something.
I said that.
I feel, and you're not the only one. And a lot of people are like, well, why didn't they do it? I feel like it's probably an engine issue. I mean, they don't, like, what Fallout game or what any game has had any kind of vehicle exploration. I mean Elder Scrolls, you had a horse.
Wasn't great.
You had a horse.
Something.
But that's what I'm worried about is what if the reason why, and I don't know this for sure, I might be reaching,
they
but
don't want
what
to
if the
copy
limitations...
Mass Effect? Oh, I thought you were going to go
what
there.
if a limitation is the engine? they can't do it because their engine wouldn't hold up. Maybe if they move too fast to an environment, their engine, like the level of detail, the load, the pop-in is too terrible. Like it's not optimized enough to handle traveling across vast distances at a certain speed. Like I feel like their engine, it feels like it's at a breaking point.
Maybe they need
and it can't introduce new technologies.
Maybe they need to
like
move
there's stuff that other games do better.
Just move to Unity.
Oh boy.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. I think they would, and I think this is interesting because, Cyberpunk, which a lot of people are comparing this game to Cyberpunk now that Cyberpunk's had a big refresh, and they're both big open explorative games, and people are now touting even more how good Cyberpunk does a lot of things. And even they have recognized the shortcomings of their engine, which apparently is already doing more than what Bethesda's engine feels like it could. And they came out and they said, no, we're switching to Unreal Engine for the next game. CD Projekt Red. I think a lot of these companies are realizing these internal engines they have to keep up with and maintain, although it can give you some freedom and flexibility. It doesn't always keep up, and especially at the rate that Bethesda's been modifying their engine. Not saying they haven't added stuff to it, and I'm not a true game dev. I don't know the inner workings of their engine or how much work went into it. So if anybody from Bethesda ever hears this, I'm sure there's a lot of effort that goes into your engine, but it feels dated, and I feel like there's limitations that are impacting the gameplay at this point. Like, why not go to Unreal? I know the answer is there's royalties they don't have to pay to Epic, and that's probably the reason they don't want to do it. But
that's more
the Unreal Engine. Yeah, but the Unreal Engine is extremely flexible. Could probably do everything they want and more. And I think they would just open themselves up to having more options with how they structure their game. Granted, I know it's a lot of work, but a lot of their old systems just aren't as good as they used to be. Like, at least we don't forgive them like we used to. If they have the exact same systems in the exact same fashion inside the next Elder Scrolls, and it's because that's just how they decided to set up the engine, that's going to be frustrating. Yeah. Even if I enjoy whatever the new world is.
They better be careful because, there's another company within Microsoft that I would say, we've talked about Obsidian before, but Obsidian does it better at this point. I know Obsidian is still relatively less talked about as Bethesda, but hey, I liked Outer Worlds.
Yes and no.
I liked Outer Worlds more than this game.
I liked Outer Worlds a lot better than this. Because when you think about what this game was trying to offer, like all the extra planets, that all fell so flat inside of Starfield. So when you yank that out, you're left with a game of handcrafted content that feels about as on scale as Outer Worlds, and Outer Worlds made it far more seamless.
Outer Worlds didn't even
shorter
have. It didn't even have exploration either, and it was a more entertaining game.
It had a little bit. It had more than this game did. Like when you went on one of the little mini maps, I was able to walk around, just find random stuff and stumble across things in a way that was far more enjoyable and far more familiar to older Bethesda games than Starfield ever did. So yeah, it was a smaller experience, but the curated experience made it so much more enjoyable, and it had a little bit of quirkiness to it, right? It wasn't so grounded, and I know that's a design decision, but I don't know. I'm going back on my rant. I'm sorry. Yeah, I am a little worried now more so about Elder Scrolls 6. I don't think they'll have the same issues as Starfield. I think the issues are going to be engine dependent, and I think they need to switch or make some serious design changes moving into the new game.
I had better not like Avowed more than Elder Scrolls 6. That had better not happen. I know they're not exactly the same type of game, but a lot of people are looking at Avowed as it's their go at a mystical sky or
medieval
Elder Scrolls.
Sky, yeah. Maybe. We'll see.
Yep.
We'll see. All right. I've talked for an hour about Starfield, so let's go ahead.
Don't worry, everyone. We're done with Starfield.
Sorry.